Thanks everyone for tuning in on this cold Wednesday morning in January. It's kind of I suppose what I do is I work with typography primarily. That's not something I've always done. It's something that I've kind of gradually worked towards throughout my career. I graduated from the Royal College in 1991. So I've been doing this for just over 30 years, really. It doesn't kind of feel like it. It feels like I'm still kind of learning how to do things, really. And I think that's probably a good mindset to have. You know, that you're constantly looking for new ways of working, new inspiration, new things out there. So I think for me, over the years, you know, I've kind of worked commercially, and I've sort of developed this style that seems to kind of communicate all the things that I want to say, and kind of talk about how I want to say things, specifically using words and type. So that's my kind of palette that I work with, and my framework that I work within. So I've got a deep love for typography that I think I've always kind of had. Kind of like, you know, thinking back to when I was a kid at school, I would kind of spend ages drawing logos for my favourite bands and things, like AC/DC and Motorhead and Adam and the Ants and stuff like that. And I was just obsessed with letter forms and type, and how, you know, the kind of abstract nature of letter forms and how they kind of create images, really. So that on the screen now, this is a selection of work that I've done over the years, and it's all got a kind of similar approach and kind of tone and feel to it. I kind of like to keep things visually rich but kind of simple. So I kind of use a specific set of typefaces. I'll talk about the type that I use a bit later on, but most of it is derived from letterpress and wood type. So by using this kind of like simple palette of kind of visual things, I kind of create this very distinctive style and approach. I think that you know, it's primarily monochrome. You know, I use black and white a lot with kind of splashes of color now and again, but I think the way that I use type and words and images is something kind of quite specific to me, and something that I've always been conscious of kind of working, you know, on my own terms, really. So not really following styles or trends that anybody else sets. You know, I'm kind of quite single-minded about the way that I work, and the inspiration that I get from historic typefaces and all that stuff is something that's kind of quite integral to the way that I work. So these images now, this is work that I produced at the Royal College. So when I was there in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, it was still kind of before computers had come in. I would use a photocopier to produce all my work. So I would kind of find things that I was interested in. I kept lots of sketchbooks and like full of kind of graphic ephemera, and then I'd kind of I'd enlarge bits of type from letter-set catalogues and paint things and photocopy the things that I'd painted and enlarge those, and kind of create collages essentially that used found imagery. But I like to kind of play around with that imagery and kind of create my own visual language, really. So I suppose at that stage I was still experimenting, and I didn't really have any kind of like big plan that this was going to be my visual approach for the rest of my career, but it felt like something that kind of formed when I was at college, and after I graduated. It was this kind of visual handwriting and approach that that's always been kind of quite specific to me. So I'd make these little publications that I would send out to people, you know, to kind of like to maybe get work off clients. So I'd make these little books, just like A4 folded photocopies that were stapled together. So this is when I started to use phrases in my work. So like this one, "The world's a giant sweet shop," you know, it kind of speaks of that overabundance of visual information and, you know, just everything out there kind of coming at you all at once, and how kind of overwhelming that can feel sometimes. So I think through this work that I was making then, I was responding to the type I was using. I was playing with text and words and kind of creating a kind of visual poetry. So, but a lot of my reference comes from fine art. So although I studied graphic design and at college, I've always had one foot in the world of fine art and the world of self-expression and authorship of, you know, my own messages and things like that. So by kind of creating works like this, it's kind of developed this kind of visual communication, but rather than communicating for clients and brands, I communicate my own work. So I think it's a kind of fine art approach really to the kind of work that I make. So these little publications, I would send them out to people, and then eventually I started getting work primarily in advertising. So I worked as a kind of essentially an illustrator for about 10 years within advertising. So I was working on campaigns for brands and, you know, things like banks and, you know, health service things, and just like all sorts of stuff really. And after sort of like 10, 15 years of doing that, you know, my desire to kind of make my own work became more important really than the commercial work. So that transition from working primarily in advertising to producing my own stuff, that kind of happened in the early 2000s. So I moved, me and my family moved down to Rye in East Sussex, and we were kind of like building a new life there, and I was kind of like working on, you know, more of my own projects, and essentially moving more into the kind of like self-authored world of kind of like, I suppose, like a fine art practice essentially. And that's when I started working with letterpress type. So Adams is on the high street in Rye. In the front, it's like an old, it's a very old building. Rye is a very old town, and Adams especially, it's kind of this funny little shop that kind of newsagents, and you can, you know, buy all sorts of things in there. And in the back, there's this amazing print workshop. And Derek, who's worked there since the 60s, he's the typesetter who I work with, and he's just got a really instinctive approach to typography. You know, he's kind of trained in type, you know, from all his career really. So it's fantastic spending time with him and setting type to kind of create the kind of work that kind of feels like my stuff really. So they've got drawers and drawers of letterpress type that I'm continually exploring. So, you know, there are drawers that haven't been opened for years, and kind of type that's lurking in there that's kind of just beautiful. So, but I kind of respond to that. I kind of go down and spend time working there, and it kind of translates into kind of like, yeah, making new work and making letterpress vibrant and important still about how it communicates. This is Ian, who prints the type. So as well as running the business, Ian a letterpress printer, so he trained in the 70s and 80s. And they've got a Heidelberg press there that we use, Heidelberg cylinder press that is from the 1950s. So everything in the workshop is from a different era, but I think for me to have that kind of connection with graphic design history and the history of printing and the history of type is something that's really important in my work. So I spend time in there kind of, working on pieces like this. So this was for an exhibition up in Leeds a couple of years ago. And this is my collection of posters that are on the wall in the workshop. So this kind of like represents the type, all the type that I use, essentially a kind of condensed wood letter type, and some kind of like blocky stuff as well. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to get a glass of water. Sorry, too much talking. Sorry, that's better. So yeah, so you can see the workshop is very textured, and it's been used for printing things for years, and it's got this kind of patina of age, and every surface is covered with printed ephemera, and like bits of paper that have been there for years, and yeah, it's really super inspiring place to work. So I also print with screen print. So a lot of the work I do originates with wood letter, and then I kind of scan that and kind of work with that digitally, and then produce artwork for screen print. So I've got access to another great workshop, Harvey Lloyd Screen Prints in Wadhurst, and that's about half an hour from where I live. So again, I've developed a long-standing relationship with Steve and Tracy there. They're great screen printers, and really knowledgeable about screen print and how to approach that. So I've been working with them for about 15 years, and the relationship has grown over the years, that we completely, but we're always exploring and sort of pushing the boundaries of screen print and kind of developing new ways of working. And yeah, it's just great. They're super creative, and the way that we work together is kind of quite intuitive, I think. So a lot of the time I kind of go over there with a kind of fixed idea of what I want to print and how I want to do it. And then other times we experiment with colours and layering and creating textures with the wood type, and it's really kind of free and as I said, kind of like intuitive way of working. Letterpress can be quite restrictive in its approach. You've only got the available type in the sizes that are there, so you kind of have to work with those. And kind of working with that restriction is really interesting, but I think sometimes you need to kind of develop ways of working that kind of are a bit more fluid and kind of can develop in more organic ways. So this is another little little trip to Brazil that I did a few years ago. I was working teaching a workshop, and I'd heard about this letterpress printer. It's called Graphica Fidalga. So I spent the day with the printer there, printing a poster, a single edition. So all of their equipment was like super worn, and they'd been using it, I think, since like the early part of the 20th century, so kind of 1920s. I think it was like a German press, but all the type was really worn down and completely distressed, and kind of, it was amazing to work with. So we made this poster together, and it was a day when we were kind of, you know, I didn't speak Portuguese, and the guy printing didn't speak English, so but we kind of created this poster together, and it was one of those moments when you're kind of like trusting all the experience that you've got, but you're also in this kind of completely kind of like unknown area as well. So you have to kind of you have to kind of trust your instincts a lot when working like this. So yeah, so that was cool, and it kind of, you know, again, it was like a great experience to kind of like free up my approach to typography. And you know, I kind of really like type that hasn't been over designed, or you know, the layouts aren't, you know, are still quite kind of raw really. So yeah, that's something that I love to have in my work. I also work with a screen print workshop in Shoreditch in East London, Jealous Gallery. So this is Ben who works there, who I print with a lot. So he works with screen print as well, but it's on a much larger scale than we can print at the other workshop. And Ben's a great printer, and again, we kind of experiment with materials and colours and scale, and that's something that, you know, I think as an artist, it's kind of good to work with other people who, you know, work collaboratively. You know, it's always good to work with people who know more than you about a specific technique or subject. So if I was in a screen print workshop, I'd kind of like have an idea of how to print myself, but it's always great when there's somebody there who knows exactly what they're doing. So yeah, and he's got a very impressive beard. So when I kind of make projects for specific causes, it's something that is something that I kind of feel strongly about, that, you know, I'm not just making work for myself, but it's trying to say something about the world that we live in and how the world's changing. So this is a print that I made using charcoal from the wildfires in Australia. So I was working with a group over there to create work for an exhibition, and they sent me a box of charcoal, which I ground down and mixed with ink and then screen printed with. So again, this was at the workshop nearby, so they were great in helping me kind of develop this kind of charcoal and ink mixture. And the print says "No safe place," and it's about how, you know, that the world is becoming kind of less safe for us to live in. So yeah, so to physically have the material that I was working with embedded in the actual print that I was making, it kind of gave the work that added connection to the subject that I was talking about. So a lot of my work references my collections of kind of typography and collections of printed ephemera that I've been amassing over the years. So I made this website, XYZ, that collects all this stuff together. So it acts as a kind of reference for me, and a kind of mood board, kind of like inspiration. So yeah, so this project I developed over lockdown, so I had plenty of time to kind of scan in, you know, all the kind of like reference material that I draw upon. So all these things are kind of from sketchbooks, things that I've collected over the years, and kind of reference that is not just like, you know, taking inspiration from other designers or, you know, stuff that you see online. You know, this is all kind of like raw, kind of gritty, untamed graphic design. You know, the kind of the rawness that kind of gives it its kind of texture and form is something that I really really love. So this is this is the mural project I worked on in Leeds. This was during lockdown as well, and it was a process of developing an idea for the mural that would kind of work in the city, and be a kind of landmark for the city, and reference community and togetherness and human connections. So I think with this piece of work, it's a fairly straightforward process, but I went up to look at the site and then proposed this idea, this repeat me and you, that goes off the top of the building and kind of disappears through the bottom. And yeah, the people I was working with were really into the idea. So yeah, this was the kind of final design. So the process of working on this, I just set the type, set it to scale, and then handed it over to the guys who were painting the actual mural. So my actual physical part of the process was kind of quite small at the beginning. And then it turned into this enormous mural. So it's something that I think is a really great expression of how I see my work and how I see my work in the world, and how it kind of, how I want it to be out there doing its thing, and showing these kind of simple graphic messages and simple phrases that when they're kind of viewed in the kind of broader context of the of the city and the people walking past this piece of work, that it kind of connects with people on a very direct and simple level. And that's something that I always want to achieve in my work, that it's not just kind of graphic design for its own sake. It's saying something out in the world, and it's kind of making some kind of human kind of connection, really. So just before Christmas, I had an exhibition in London, and it took the ampersand from the mural and it translated it into the gallery. So it's pretty much the same scale as it was on the wall in Leeds as it is in the gallery space. And with this exhibition, I produced a series of prints that were all using the ampersand. So I wanted to create an abstract exhibition, but was still rooted in typography. And I think this, by using these symbols and characters as abstract forms, really. So almost the kind of like painterly aspect of letter and type design, but by repeating and rotating and inverting the letters, then it created this whole series of work. So again, it's kind of quite simple, the approach. I wanted it to be something that's very direct and almost automatic in its way of working, so that I would select the typography and then kind of put it through this system of kind of repeating and rotating and inverting to create a new body of work. So I like systems, and this is something that I want to explore more in my work, the kind of setting up systems that then let work develop into new and interesting ways. So the gallery, I like the galleries to be kind of very sparse and just have the work repeated on the walls like this. To create an installation of kind of type and words. So that's